All right, wondering if we should go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm having fun in the chat window over on the side here, saying hello to everybody and seeing that we've got people from truly all over joining us. Well, what a wonderful thing. The magic of modern technology mixed with the difficult need to meet virtually. So we're trying to find a balance between those. Everybody, my name is Scott Yaruss. I'm from Stuttering Therapy Resources, and I'm a professor at Michigan State University.
And I'm Nina Reeves. I am a school-based and private practitioner fluency specialist here in Dallas, Texas. And Scott and I are really excited to have everybody join us again for our Stuttering Therapy Resources office hours. We love to talk about stuttering. We are authors and practicing clinicians, and we do this every day. And so we're excited to bring people together to talk about it with us.
All right. Well, what we're going to do today's topic is talking about strategies. Everybody wants to know about strategies, and we have a ton to say, way more than we could possibly say in an hour. I'm going to start off with just some housekeeping details so everyone knows about these, okay? We're going to do our best to leave some time at the end for question and answer. I can predict right now that that's going to be really hard because there's so much we want to say, but please do use the chat window over on the side and type your questions to us. We will do our best to answer them as we go. What you'll see is when one of us is talking, the other one will be furiously typing in the corner to answer questions or to respond. So you can go ahead and send questions through that way. You can also email them to us, and we'll give you our contact info later. But if you see us on the side, don't worry, we're not just answering our email, we're trying to catch up on the chat. We are indeed recording this session, so please be aware. I've turned off everyone's video so you won't appear. If you don't want to appear, don't turn on your video. But we will be recording this, and the replay will be available on our YouTube channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please join us. It's Stuttering Therapy Res, because Stuttering Therapy Resources is too long for YouTube. But please subscribe to our channel there, and that way you'll get notices directly from YouTube when we post new material. And we've been putting up a ton of videos lately. You can also access them directly on our website, which is stutteringtherapyresources.com. Here's what we're going to talk about today. As you know, our topic is strategies. So we're going to start off by talking a little bit about how we can adapt the idea of strategies to this time of school shutdowns. Now, I know we've got an international group on the line today. I know that some of you are actually going back to school in some places. Here in the United States, it's a state by state, locality by locality type of thing. But we recognize that at least for many of us, we'll be doing therapy as well as we can remotely for a while longer yet. So Nina's going to start off by talking about how we can adapt what we do to this time of shutdowns. And then we're going to toss it back and forth and take turns talking about how we prepare to use strategies. We'll talk about some specific strategies for decreasing physical tension and struggle during moments of stuttering so that people can stutter pardon me, and speak more easily. Then we'll talk about some strategies for enhancing the ease of communication and the flow of speech. As time allows, we'll drop into general communication skills because those are important too. And then we'll talk you through some resources, places to get additional information, and how to find out about more of the materials that we're putting up as we go through this crisis. So I'm going to turn it over to Nina now, and she's going to talk about how we adapt this to this home practice remote learning time.
It's a great topic to talk about right now, but I want to make the point that the things I'm going to say to you next really aren't just about home learning time. It's all about, they can be adapted to when we get back to our clinics and our schools, being able to take this information and think, oh, before I send something home for homework or for carryover or generalization practice, I better think about a few things. So this is a slide that just gives us an idea of some things to ask ourselves before we launch into sending home information about practice, especially during this time and beyond. So one of the things I like to ask myself before I get involved in home practice for any of my students is, does this child really know the technique? And I mean really. Is it solid enough in our therapy room that I feel comfortable that this child will practice and play with this technique correctly, at least most of the time, as he's practicing it in a home or social environment? And so not only does the child know it, but at what level is the child able to access that technique? And it's so very different. The difference between therapy reality and real life reality um, is very different for children. And so if they are, let's say, using a strategy at the sentence level in our very structured therapy room, we wouldn't want to be sending home sentence level practice because we want them to have that success. So we would back off of the level of complexity that we'd send home. And so we want to think about that as we start to prepare packets or ask parents to be homework listening buddies. We really have to think about that. Um, Again, not only what level on the hierarchy is the child, but do the parents understand what a hierarchy is? Have we explained it? By the way, there's a great handout on our website about helping other people understand hierarchies. And I think it's a very good idea to get that sent home to parents or talk about it with parents before we ever start to send home practice for kiddos. Because one of the things that parents get confused about, oh, he knows the easy start in the therapy room, we should practice it at the dinner table. And I'm going, whoa, time out. Not ready for that yet. Okay. And so we have to have people around the child as well as the child understand the hierarchy of how we discover and learn and begin to use strategies, because practicing strategies and using strategies are two different things. And we want other people around that child to understand it so they can bridge and know what a reasonable expectation would be. Okay. And finally, oh, there's so much more to say on this, but I'm going to keep it brief. Um, does the parent know how to be a good practice partner? Because we have to assume that parents need that information from us. They need to know what the technique is, what it looks like. And of course, we have some videos of the strategies on our website. But do they have that basis of knowledge, and do they know what we expect from them? Because we want them to be a great practice partner, but we do not want to put them in the position of being the speech therapist. They are not supposed to be our substitute right now. They are supposed to be a support for their child while we are in our different ways. In each district, in each clinic, we're doing this differently. But the way we support them and then the parents support that. And we want parents to know they're not supposed to correct their children's speech. They're not supposed to tell them how to do a strategy. They're supposed to be great listening partners. And if they think something's not going right, that's when we want to help them know. Give us a call, send us an email, contact us, and we'll take care of trying to negotiate what might be going wrong with the home practice. So these are just some ideas to think about as we start to provide these services for kids in different ways. It's just that we don't want to try to do exactly what we've done in the past in a time where that's probably not going to work out as well. We have to be thinking about some questions to ask ourselves.
Nina, can I add one thing to the end about the parents? Because I
Yeah,
just had, no, okay, never mind.
of course. I
I
just
just
thought
had
I've been wanting to say that for 3 weeks, so whatever.
Yeah, I
Go
never
for it.
listen anyway. I just had this exact situation with one of the families that I'm working with. And so I know that we're tight on time, but I want to tell just a real brief story here. This is a father who's very invested in helping his son, which is wonderful, of course. He's also uncertain about what to do. And he knows he's not getting his regular therapy right now. Dad's going to try to pick up the slack and try to help. And so I introduced an activity with them of they were doing some pseudo stuttering practice, which we'll be talking about in just a little bit during the presentation here. They were doing a little pseudo stuttering practice, and they were supposed to put their hand up, and help each other do stutters of different kinds. Great, fun activity. Kid and the dad had practiced it in the session over Zoom. But then when they went home or when they went to practice on their own, the dad was like raising his hand every third word because he wanted to get a ton of practice in. And so I got the kid to do 100 stutters. And meanwhile, the poor kid is just exhausted physically, emotionally. The dad was doing the best he could, but he's not a speech language pathologist and shouldn't have to be. He didn't have the natural sensitivity that we've developed as clinicians to be aware of the child's level. He was just going for those tokens. And he was doing what I asked him to do. I just hadn't really taken fully into account the innate instinct that we have or that we develop as therapists. So help the parents explicitly see they do not have to be the clinician. They're providing support however they can, and we're providing support to them. But I had to take a step back and just laugh at myself because, yeah, I should know. I should know. But just the same, Dad was enthusiastic. So, all right. Let's go ahead and talk about some techniques then, okay? One of the first things that we want to highlight before we get into any technique practice, and I have to apologize as we do this because I'm going to have a barking dog in the background. She's just really wants to be in this room with me. We have to think about what a technique is in the first place, and we need to spend some time laying a foundation for our kids to be able to use techniques. We're going to go into pet peeve time for me here because I have a huge pet peeve about this and about a million other things. Just because we do something in therapy does not mean that it's a technique, does not mean that we should say, oh, we're doing breathing. Let's call it the breathing technique, or let's call it the strategy for this. A lot of what we do in therapy is designed to be educational and foundational. And if we simply give kids or adults a huge list of techniques that they need to learn, it will truly be overwhelming to them. I think one of the problems that we faced as a field is that we've tried to do way too much in our therapy because we know a lot of things. We know a lot of techniques. That's lovely. We have a lot of knowledge to draw upon. But if we say, oh, yeah, parents, you're going to do this technique and this technique and this technique and this technique, yes, those exist. And yes, different techniques are right for different people. No doubt about that. But that doesn't mean we drown them. As you may well know, stuttering is not the favorite area for many speech language pathologists to work in. Obviously, it's ours, and we're hoping to convince you that it will become yours. But as we think about techniques, I think one of the reasons that this has been difficult is that we've just been overwhelmed. How many times have you wondered, oh my goodness, which technique should I use with this kid? Well, let's just try them all. But no, just as it's overwhelming to you, it's overwhelming to them. And so one of the things that we're going to emphasize as we talk about techniques here is, yeah, we're going to review a few different ones, but these are not designed to be used with everybody, period. And they are not all designed to be used with anybody. We're going to select using our clinical judgment and working with the client on their goals to select justified techniques that are relevant for each individual person. And it's not just, oh, you're doing this thing, let's call it a technique. These have to have a database. These have to have a foundation. These have to have evidence. And so we're going to talk about evidence-based techniques that are individually tailored for each child and each client and each family with whom we're working. But even so, this is hard. We can't just say, oh, I'm going to teach you easy start and expect the child to be able to do it. We have to first lay an understanding for them, their foundation, so they will understand, like Nina was saying just a moment ago, truly understand the technique. They have to have a deep knowledge so that they can generate it on their own. If they're dependent on you or on their parents for their success, then you will not succeed with generalization. And generalization is probably one of the biggest challenges that we face with stuttering therapy. How many times have you said, oh, yeah, the kid can do it in the therapy room, but he can't do it in the classroom or on the Zoom or on the playground or with his friends? And very often the reason for generalization failure is because we haven't built a solid foundation. The foundation helps us with the entire therapy process. And the first step of that is helping kids learn about speaking. We have to help kids develop an understanding of the speech mechanism and ultimately of the language mechanism as well. So they understand what they do when they're talking and they can better understand what happens when talking is hard for them. So they learn about speaking, and we have on our website a speech machine activity, and lots of people have done this. This has become a very common activity that people use in therapy, drawing a speech man and things like that. Great stuff, fine. But they need to understand how those parts work together. They need to understand what happens when they have trouble speaking, when they're stuttering. Okay, so we need to talk openly with the kids about stuttering and help them develop a comfort in talking with us. Then, before we get into teaching the kids a bunch of techniques, we have to help them understand the goals of therapy. They need to be sure that they understand what they're trying to accomplish. Nina and I use in our books, and we're going to show you in just a few minutes, our summary sheets that are at the back of our books. For every technique that we teach, we have a summary sheet. And the first thing about the summary sheets that's important to know is that they cover the rationale for using a strategy. You don't want to just teach a strategy and say, okay, you're going to use this. You have to help them understand why to use it and when to use it and how to use it. And they have to be able to independently respond back what that rationale is. I use Easy Start because it helps me reduce tension in my speech, move forward more easily. I use pseudo stuttering or voluntary stuttering in my speech because it helps me reduce my fear, reduce my tension, speak when I'm afraid to speak. We'll talk about rationale for each of the techniques that we introduced today. And you're going to notice that our emphasis here is on helping our students become thinking clients and helping you as clinicians be thinking clinicians. We're not just throwing a bunch of techniques at people, we are helping them understand the why, the how, the when, and how to adapt to unique situations. Because ultimately we have to address this last point on this slide, the limitations of our techniques. Techniques are not perfect. They do not cure stuttering. They do not solve the problem. They do not make it easy. They do not pretend that the person's going to not stutter anymore, or we're going to make it disappear, or all those things that you might see online. Okay, this is a difficult thing that we're asking kids to do, and it's going to take a lot of effort on their part. And if they don't know that, they're going to try to use a technique at a time when they really want it to work, and it's going to fail, okay? And they're going to be discouraged. So I go in telling the kids from the beginning, yeah, I'm going to teach you some techniques to help you with your speech, but keep in mind, these don't always work. They're not perfect. They're not a cure. They can help, but they're not a cure. Much like my glasses help me see, but they're not perfect. They don't cure my eyesight. They help me. And there are situations where they help me more, and there are situations where, frankly, they help me less. And I go into it, no pun intended, with my eyes open, knowing what to expect. Now we've got a savvy client. We've got an expert client who is better prepared to navigate the difficult waters of real life communication on his own. Nina.
Thank you, Scott. I love that the idea of the foundation brings us right into being able to talk about the strategies. And so let me bring up our ideas for this first set of strategies that we're going to do. And those are the strategies to help children ease out of stutters. And these are the strategies that I have found, and Scott and I discussed this at times. I feel like the speech therapists that I work with feel least comfortable with these. They feel much more comfortable with the easing in strategies, the fluency strategies, but these are the set of strategies that create a space where speech language pathologists have to put stuttering in their own mouths. And so that can be uncomfortable. And we just did a post about this on social media about making sure that one of the first things that we do is realize that we as clinicians have to desensitize to stuttering, watching it, listening to it, seeing it in our students, and also desensitized to the idea of putting stuttering, fake stuttering, in our mouths, and experimenting with that tension. And so one of the things that we find is that this set of strategies, the easing out strategies, used to be called stuttering modification strategies. These are the strategies that we really need to dive into our own desensitization in order to be more successful. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is one of the most important things that I have to talk about with my students if and when we get to these types of strategies, is that nothing here on this page, nothing that we're about to discover together or do together is about fluency. We are not focused on fluency on these. These are not going to make you not stutter. You're not using this strategy to not stutter. You're using this strategy to stutter more easily. And as Scott was saying, as he was talking about the foundation, it's the why. Why are we doing what we are doing? What is the intent? Well, this entire group of strategies is the intent is to bring down the amount of tension and struggle that children are experiencing as they speak. So, as Scott was saying, I'm going to talk about pullouts and prep sets. He's going to do voluntary stuttering and cancellation. But he gave some really good ideas, and we talk about this in our books and in our videos, that before you launch into this, the child has to be able to at least feel, understand, know when tension is happening in their speech. And so that exploration about speaking and stuttering is very important before we get into, let's say, a pullout. And so you may be familiar with the strategy of pullout. My students get confused about it. Sometimes they get confused with cancellations and pullouts. And so we have to walk through the differences. But I've always watched my students feel very empowered by pullouts because they find their tension, they notice a moment of stuttering, and instead of pushing through it or avoiding it and going around it, they feel empowered that they can be in that stutter and then ease through that stutter during the moment. I love that this is a during the moment strategy. And that empowering feeling of, I don't always have a choice of if I stutter, but I can make some choices of how I stutter, really helps them move forward with their talking. And so being able to, as a clinician, discover, yeah, baby, my lips are really tight there. Yep. Now I'm going to stay in it. A very important part of a pullout is to be able to stay in the stutter long enough to figure out, where am I tense? How tense am I in my speech muscles? So there's a lot of desensitization that goes on even while you're discovering this strategy. And so you stay in that moment until you feel like you can release it a little at a time as you say it. So you're decreasing tension and struggle as you say the word. And so we have entire video on this strategy on our website. I could go on and on forever, but making certain that we play with all of the different places in the speech apparatus that kids can get stuck. I am going to the or after school. And see, that's catching the stuttered moment, identifying where the tension is, and easing the tension as you go. So you have to know the difference between tight and loose muscles, all of that foundation information that Scott was talking about before. This is setting them up for success with a strategy like a pullout. Scott, do you want to jump in before I head to prep sets? Okay.
Beautiful.
All righty. Now, prep sets are one of my favorites because I let them be orphaned for a really long time in my own practice. For some reason, I got this idea that it was preparatory set was a high level that only some of my older kids could do. And it was my own students who taught me that preparatory set can be a wonderful technique and strategy for any child. Some of my students came back to me. I tell the story, and Scott knows this one. I tell the story of the little second grader who bounds into my therapy room one day and said, I have a new trick. And I'm thinking, oh, trick. Trick is not a great word. Trick means avoidance. Trick means I'm going to tap my toe or something. And she sat down and she goes, you know, you know how I'm very good at being able to tell if I'm going to stutter. And I said, yes, I do. And she said, well, I have this new trick. Instead of waiting for my stutter to get really big and out of control and then using that pullout thing, I decided maybe I'll kind of bounce into the stutter a little bit and see if I can handle it easier. She didn't say handle, but you get my drift. And I sat there with these big wide eyes and thought, oh my gosh, this second grade young lady is describing a preparatory set to me. And so it launched me into the idea that, clinicians can learn from their students a lot, and brought back preparatory set into my practice. And so this is a strategy that's interesting to talk about as you're trying to learn it and discover it, because in my opinion, it's a bit of a head game for my students. I use it when my students are those kiddos who anticipate moments of stuttering. They think they're going to stutter on a word. And I also use it for my students who can feel the stutters coming, who are pretty proprioceptively aware of the tension coming. So it can be one or the other of those types of approach, understanding of their stutter. And then, like my little second grader said, instead of waiting for it to get big out of control, I can ease out of that anticipated tension that I think I'm going to have, or that tension I feel coming. I can ease out of it as I sort of move into the word in an easier way. And it's amazing to watch a child who thinks they're going to stutter on the word stutter be able to say, yes, sometimes I stutter. Yes, sometimes I stutter. Sometimes I stutter. And so they utilize, as another one of my fifth grade boys said, it's like a preemptive strike. I am using stuttering to decrease my tension as I move through that stutter. And I'm like, you go, boy. That is exactly what we're talking about. So that strategy is not anything that a listener is going to know is happening, because it is internal to the child. They're either thinking they're going to stutter, they're feeling a stutter coming, and they're managing it in an easier way as they say the word. So that's a fun one to talk about. Again, we have a summary sheet and video on it. And I just wanted to bring that up because it's one of those more orphaned techniques that I think has been lost in the literature for a while and can be very powerful for some of our students.
All right. So it's my turn again, I think. Um, yes, just commenting on a question that's coming up on the chat. I understand people are asking if we have ebook versions of our books. I wish we did. There's just no way for us to do it. We're a very small company. There's Nina and her husband Lee, my best friend. He is our bookkeeper and everything. There's me, and there's my wife Virginia, and she does all the design and layout. And given that this is something that we do on the side, we're going to make as much available as freely as we can. And in fact, I did want to take a quick second while we transition over to those next two techniques to show everybody briefly the website. Okay, stutteringtherapyresources.com, and this is our resources tab here that you are seeing. And I hope, did it come up, Nina? Yeah, okay. And you can see these are the office hours that we're doing now. Here's some new practical tips specifically on e-learning and telepractice. new videos that we've been posting, handouts. Here's the generalization handout that Nina mentioned, and the hierarchy handouts. And then if you slide down, you're going to find a whole series of videos on the techniques that we're talking about today. These practical tips, many of them have been translated into Spanish, thanks to our friend Denise Behrens, who's on the line here. We have some in Arabic, one in Romanian, and just last week we got one in Vietnamese. So please, I know we have many international friends on the line here, so please let us know, and we're going to keep cranking out as much stuff as we can. Let me get back to topic then, voluntary stuttering. Why on earth would we ask people to stutter on purpose? Because kids come into therapy and their parents especially think they're coming to therapy to make them not stutter, and here we are making them stutter. Rationale is the key. It's not just a technique, it is understanding, why would I do this? Well, for voluntary stuttering or pseudo stuttering, there are many, many reasons to do this. One of those reasons is, just as Nina was talking about, to allow that stutter to happen, to let the person be in it so that A, they learn about it, and B, they begin to learn to tolerate it. That's the key to moving forward. An important principle: most of the people that we work with are not having a problem because they stutter. They're having a problem because they're afraid of stuttering. They're having a problem because they're uncomfortable with stuttering. They're having a problem because their reactions and the reactions of others are causing a problem. It's not the stutter itself, but it's very hard to get to that until they can experience the stutter and be in it. And the voluntary stuttering exercise allows us to increase the number of times that they touch that fear, that they expose themselves to that third rail that they've been terrified of in their lives. I've got an adult client right now, and his homework assignment for this week is simply in a quiet room by himself to, to allow himself to experience a moment of disrupted speech, something that has been terrifying for him for decades, truly. And now he's feeling it, he's being in it, he's learning that he can tolerate it. He doesn't necessarily have to love it. Acceptance doesn't mean that we love stuttering. Acceptance doesn't mean that we're giving up on other aspects of therapy, but it means that we can be in that place with the stutter and tolerate it. And that helps to reduce the tension, the struggle, the avoidance, the shame, all of those negative consequences. They don't come from the stutter, they come from the fear of stutter. So, voluntary stuttering is good for learning about stuttering. It's good for desensitizing to stuttering. And it's good for helping people learn that they can have a moment of stuttering in their speech and then continue moving on, continue to say what they wanted to say, and the stutter does not have to hold them back. There's so much that they gain from the voluntary stuttering strategy that we truly could spend the entire hour just talking about the value of pseudo stuttering and voluntary stuttering. Nina made a tremendously important point before, though, that I really want to emphasize, and that is that it's very hard to do this as a therapist until you yourself can put stuttering into your own mouth, until you yourself can overcome your own discomfort with stuttering. And the way that you would do that is by pseudo stuttering. I encourage clinicians to spend time experiencing that time pressure, that fear that goes with it, that sense that this is going to last forever, and then learning to tolerate it. Those of you who are familiar with counseling approaches are going to notice a lot of cognitive behavioral work in here, a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy work in here, of being able to tolerate those moments. With my older clients, I think I said this in last week's office hours, the one before, with my older clients, we talk about getting a stutter in our mouth and roll it around in their mouth like they would be savoring a fine wine. Don't use that one with your kids. Perhaps chocolate? Yeah, really good dark chocolate. Just let it in there. Ah, and experience it. It also, in addition to all that stuff, is useful for educating others about stuttering. And we're not going to go into that much detail about that part today, because next week we're going to be talking about families in our office hours session. And we do a lot of desensitization, voluntary stuttering work, pseudo stuttering work with parents as well, with peers as well, with other family members as well, so that everybody can gain that understanding. The four most important words that a person who stutters will ever learn in their entire life. It's okay to stutter. Uh-huh. And then sometimes when they're feeling like their stuttering is a little out of control for them, when they're feeling like that tension is a little too tight and they can't just let it go, that's when the fourth of the techniques on this page that we want to talk about comes into play: cancellation. Cancellation is sort of an old-fashioned term. We're not canceling out the stutter, pretending it didn't happen. This, many of you will recognize, comes from Van Riper's work, published in the 1973 book, The Treatment of Stuttering. The goal of cancellation is to help people learn more how to manage physical tension, how to change the way they stutter so that they can stutter more easily. Okay. And so, what a person does when they're using cancellation is they allow the stutter to happen. You see the desensitization built into that, almost like we were just talking about with our voluntary stuttering. You'll allow the stutter to happen, and then you go back and you change the stutter in some way. You decrease the tension. You maybe use a fluency enhancing strategy. You change something here. So when when I do a cancellation, notice that I allowed the stutter to happen, then I went back and changed it. I didn't just say it fluently. You don't learn anything if you just go back and repeat the word that you stuttered on. That's simply the adaptation effect. That's simply, of course, you're going to be fluent on it the second time. Here, we want to be in it, learn about it, desensitize to it, modify it so that we can move forward more easily. Notice again, we're not talking about fluency here. That is not the purpose of these strategies. Fluency is often a byproduct of coming to terms with stuttering, but we're not chasing it in particular with these strategies. We're learning to manage the stutter because it's the stutter that people are reacting negatively to. I'm going to use just a quick analogy and then I'm going to turn it back to Nina for the next slide, I think. Um, I think about a coconut, okay? A coconut. Everybody's seen a coconut, right? And I don't mean the little brown hairy thing that you get in the market. I mean the one you get on the islands, okay? The big green and yellow, sinewy, husky thing that everybody wants because inside that coconut water, the coconut milk is delicious. A little lime, a little salt, a little tequila, it's perfect, okay? That's what you want. But you can't get to it because it's encased inside this hard shell. Well, think of fluency as like the stuff inside the coconut. Everybody wants it, sure, of course, but you can't get to it until you work your way through that shell that's comprised of the fear and the embarrassment and the shame and the avoidance and the tension and the struggle. And when we learn to come to terms with those, then it is easier to get to the inside. Still not a cure, still not magic, but it makes it easier.
I am going to move us into the next set of strategies, which are the strategies that help students increase that flow, increase that ease of speaking. And so this helps to increase fluency. But my warning to all of my colleagues and to myself and to my students is to make certain that these kinds of strategies are definitely to help us increase our flow, have less tense moments, but there's not an expectation of fluency. It's okay to feel more fluent. It's okay to want more fluency. It is the expectation of being fluent, that 100%, that I'm not going to stutter anymore, that causes the unintended consequences of those negative feelings, that I'm doing something wrong when I stutter. And so we want to make sure that the intent of this set of strategies that we're going to talk about now is to ease communication. I want to feel like I have more flow right now. I want to have easier communication for myself, not for my listeners, not for the what ifs or the I don't want them to. This is what I talk about with my students, exactly how I'm speaking about it with you right now, and adjusted to their age and readiness level. But I want us to really be clear that these are not an expectation to be used all the time or to create perfect fluency. Since, by the way, and we have a couple of cool handouts in the book about this, perfect fluency doesn't exist. So we're chasing something that nobody has. And identifying that as we begin these types of strategies with kiddos is really important, because if they use them to not stutter, the strategy itself, in my opinion, becomes an avoidance. And so we have to be very careful about how we present these with kids and how we talk about them. And our summary sheets give them the rationale, and we talk about it a lot, and we keep reminding them throughout, and we check in with them to see what they're thinking and feeling as we go through the strategies, and we keep moving along. So let me stop this share and get back, because I'm going to talk to you about easy onset and light touches. I'm going to separate them out, and I'll tell you the rationale for that in a moment. But I think we all know that easy onset and light touch end up being together as children start to move forward with their speech in an easier way. Easy onset is a strategy that is very basic to speech language pathology. And I think that it has become so basic that people have stopped doing it well. Oh, thank you, Scott, for the head shake. Because sometimes I say things and I think, did I just say that? But that's how I watch my colleagues, and I watch these kiddos who I may see on a consultation, and I ask them to show me an easy onset, and they say, okay, baby. Show that to me again, baby. And I'm thinking, whoa, wait a second, and so we have to really think about, are we making certain that this basic strategy doesn't become a throwaway, and that we really investigate it with kids and feel it and utilize it in the way in which it's intended. I think sometimes we kind of move too quickly into this. And Scott and I, when we go to present all around the world, talk about the idea that it's not referral, assessment, easy starts for most students. We don't want to get into that idea that you start everyone with the same strategy. It depends on your clinical information that you've gained through the assessment of where to start with a child. Now, easy starts are easy onset of phonation, easy start, whatever you call it. It is starting out easy with an easy start to begin your words and your phrases. Okay. Now, I always talk about with my students in our therapy, we're going to learn it this long. I would like. And then I'll say, does Miss Nina expect you to go around talking like that? And they kind of look at me, and I go, now do this. Shake your head. No. This is how we feel it, know it, chew on it, understand how it feels in our speech machine. So we're going to learn it this long, and we're going to naturalize it over time. Because we know that students do not want to turtle talk. Sorry, they just don't. They don't want to do that. That sounds weird. But we have to let them know it's going to feel interesting for a while, and then we're going to get better at it and not make it shorter and not care about how it sounds, but care about how it feels. Does it feel easier in your speech? And that's the most important part. I do want to say this. This is the one strategy that I think has 32 names on Pinterest. Oh, the things I see sometimes. And I know it's well-meaning, but this is not mushy mouth, feather speech, stretchy talking. That's like 5 different ways of saying easy onset of phonation, which happens to be the evidence-based practice term. And so why are we giving kids 5 things to try to remember when we can just give them 1? And so Scott talked about it at the beginning. Let's not confuse kiddos. And it doesn't matter if it's a cutesy name. How about we use the name they can look up when they don't have a speech therapist? And I think that's the most important part of what I'm saying to you about easy onsets. We want to unconfuse. We want to simplify this and make the easy onset more natural for students as they are able to utilize it in longer conversations, understanding a hierarchy of difficulty, and then making certain that they feel comfortable with it and that they feel like this is a strategy that helps them in certain times, but they're not expected to use it 24/7. Now, let me fold right into light touch because they go together so nicely. And you'll notice in our book that we talk about them being best friends, because one of my students drew a little drawing of them holding hands, easy onsets and light touch holding hands. Because when you start out easy, I keep using the word baby. Let me find a different word. Table, table. When you start out easy like that, that's a light touch, table, and a little easy onset on the back end. And so I don't have to remember that. I'm not going to tell my student, now start with a light touch and then do an easy onset, or start with an easy onset and do a light touch. Ocean. Because it's going to flow that way. They're not going to go ocean or table. When they start out easy, these two come together. Tables can be really smooth. I like to still separate light touch for the discovery part, for the learning part. And I told you I would give you a rationale. For me, I have watched my students blend them over time, but at the beginning, when we start to discover light touch, it's let's do it really tight. Boat, cat, and then let's do it light. Cat, cat. It's that proprioceptive awareness of the sort of minimal pair type of contrast of what it feels like in your mouth to be tight, regular, or loose. Tight and loose in our speech machine. And light contact helps them really tune in to what feels light. I feel light in my vocal cords. I feel light on with my teeth on my lips. Feel. Okay. And it's just that idea of the proprioceptive awareness that helps them get into understanding this easier flow of speech in a more deep way. And so that's why I separate them at first and then I let them blend as the child learns to move them up the hierarchy.
I think I'm on.
I think you're on.
Okay, that was great. Simplify, 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 but don't make simplistic. That's something that I'm really struggling with right now because I know we want to make materials accessible for clinicians, for our students, for families, but that doesn't mean we have to throw our brains out the window. We still want to think these through and help our clients think these through to the extent that they're able, of course. There's a post about children who may have intellectual issues, right? Well, then we're going to do as much as we can. And we talked a bit about children with Down syndrome last week in our office hours, and that recording's on our website. But to the extent that we can, we want our clients thinking, we want the parents thinking, but not overwhelmed, and we want us thinking. So simplify, but not simplistic. And that relates finally to the last of these techniques about making speech easier, and that is what was often called pausing and phrasing, but we also hear this talked about as slower rate. We hear it as, turtle speech. I have nothing against turtles. I love turtles. You may remember from the session a couple weeks ago that I was showing some of the turtles that I keep on my desk. I've always had turtles. It's not that I hate turtles, and it's not because of turtle speech thing. It's just nobody wants to talk like this in the real world. Okay. Now, I know that there are therapy approaches for adolescents and adults that are based on prolonged speech, and that is a different kind of thing because before they go out into the real world, they do speed it up and make it more natural. School age kids can't maintain that. And in fact, many adults can't maintain that either because it's unnatural. So, yeah, all right, we know on the one hand that slowing is useful, but telling people to slow down is just going to result in some unnatural sounding speech. Is there a way that we can get the benefits of slowing down, giving the brain more time to process, giving the speech machine more time to produce without sounding weird? Yeah, and indeed there is. That's what pausing and phrasing is all about. Pausing and phrasing is about capitalizing on the natural ebb and flow of communication and of speaking, and allowing that natural ebb and flow to give the brain the time it needs for planning and the speech machine the time it needs for producing. What we do with the pausing and phrasing strategy is we simply leave a brief pause in between groups of words. We're not telling the child to slow down. We're helping him learn that if he gives his system a little bit more time, it's going to be a little bit more successful. We're not telling him think before he talks because obviously he did. It's required. We're not telling him, although we all do know some people who seem to tweet or talk before they've thought about what they're saying, but it's part of the process of planning speech and language, okay? But we're not just telling him count to two in your head before you talk. We're saying let's give your system the time that it needs in order to be able to move forward easily. That's all this is about. That's all this is about. So you've heard a lot about a slowing technique or this technique or that technique. Don't overcomplicate it. Help the kids learn that when we talk, we have to plan what we're going to say, and we have to use our speech machine to say it, okay? And the speech machine needs just a little bit of time sometimes to be able to say what you want to say more easily. Now, how do we introduce pausing and phrasing? Well, there we can go through a modeling stage. For older kids, we can go through a reading stage where we identify appropriate places to pause. This matches very nicely with what they're learning in their language arts class or in their English language class or whatever language you speak class, because we have international audience today. Um, just identifying, we stop at commas. We can pause at a comma or a period or a full stop to just allow a little time for our brains to process and our speech machine to produce. And when we do that, and when we learn that we can tolerate being in those moments of slight uncertainty, then that takes some of the pressure off of communicating. That's the time pressure that Nina will be talking about in just a moment. When we feel time pressure to do something, whatever it is, we don't do it at our best. You're going to see that in just a few minutes when we start to run out of time and I start to try to go faster. I won't be able to do it at my best. And all we're doing with pausing and phrasing is we're helping the child, again, leverage natural pauses in speech to give his system more time to make talking more to make talking easier. That's the key. I want to say one brief thing before I toss it back to Nina. I want you to look at the strategies that we've been using, that we've talked about, various techniques, and we've given you a few different names of techniques. Are there more? Sure. But are they that different? No. There are a whole bunch of name branded techniques out there, and it seems like everybody's got to, put their name on a thing. You'll notice that we try to use as generic a name as possible so that it is explanatory for the child and the parent, and so that they can go look it up online or in their materials that we give to them, and they will have knowledge that they can carry forward. We don't want name branded techniques. We're not putting a trademark after any of these things. It is simply to use as plain spoken a way of saying that, oh yeah, we're pausing in between phrases. Okay, great. We're starting with a lighter contact. We're using an easier start or an easy onset. We talk. We're trying to be as descriptive as we can. And if you look at all these techniques, you're going to find out that even though we've simplified this list, we can simplify it one step further. In our books, the school age book in particular, or the early childhood book at the end of chapter 6, we talk about simplifying all of these techniques that we're talking about, that they all involve changes to one or the other of only two fundamental aspects of speech. And those two fundamental aspects of speech are timing, pausing and phrasing, and tension, light touch, light contact, easy onset, cancellation. We're either changing timing or tension. And so rather than trying to teach kids a list of 25 different techniques, we focus on two fundamental changes and then we adapt them to that particular child's or adult client's needs, right? We do the adapting based on our understanding of them, and then we work with them and we play around with it with them to help them make it their own. Tossing back.
All
I know I
right.
left you with like 30 seconds, but
That's
we're going
all
to go a
right.
little long
And
today.
we
Yeah.
are, because it's our office hours, people, and we get to do what we want. Yes, we are gonna respect your time, but we do want to try to get through what we said we were going to get through. The good news about this next set of techniques is that I get to tell you um, that we're going to do a quick overview. Pardon me, I am triple tasking. There we go. Um, the idea here is that general communication skills are important for kids who stutter. There are many people who stutter who communicate just fine. They don't need a lot of help in learning to communicate. They're trying to learn to communicate easier. Okay? So, I'm not saying that every child needs help with the 3 that I've put up here on a slide or the ones we write about in our books. These just tend to show up more often than not. Oh, good. A sneeze. Okay. Sorry. That was the first one for me. Okay. Sneeze on camera. I'll try to edit that one out. So I'm going to talk to you in very brief about these 3 being things that show up in therapy more often than not for kids who stutter. And the good news is we have our summary sheets, and I am working on a video that will talk about these in our series of videos. I noticed the other day we hadn't done these parts. And so I'll get those up as time allows, because global pandemic. I will get them as soon as I can. But I will tell you that as children get their voices and begin to speak more, if a child has been holding back and they want to speak more and get more involved, then learning about turn taking and having the people around him learn about turn taking so that he can decrease that feeling of time pressure. Utilizing good eye contact is a strategy we'd like that many people would use, but it is learned and it is a mature thing, and I don't want to overemphasize it because children need to have time to become more desensitized to the strategy use or the moments of stuttering where they feel comfortable and confident looking at people as they speak. It doesn't necessarily program itself. You have to decide when children are ready for these and if they need them. But I have to stop and take a moment about handling time pressure, because one of the things that's happened in my own practice over the past really just few years is I've realized I used to talk about handling time pressure as an aside, and now I talk about it pretty much right away, almost first in the strategies and techniques, because if you've probably noticed, some of your children, as they learn strategies, try to rush the strategies. And as they rush the strategies start to break down, and they start to think it's the fault of the strategy, that it doesn't work. But we start to peel back the onion and find out it was a lot about the rushing. I don't want to take the time to use the strategy. I don't want to take the time to use a pullout because people are waiting for me. So that internal time pressure and that perceived external time pressure can impact a lot of what you're trying to do in therapy. So you might want to consider, as I did, bringing it forward a little bit. So I know we're almost at the top of the hour. Of course, I have, I think, a little different time on mine than Scott did, but I don't want to rush through those, having you think that they don't matter. They do. We're just under time pressure. So there's more that we can say about it, and we'll keep posting.
To summarize, I don't know how to do that because there's so much more we want to say. Yes, techniques have a place in stuttering therapy, but they are not stuttering therapy. They have a place in stuttering therapy. One thing that we did not emphasize today, because we've emphasized it in some of our other presentations, is remember, rapport building is critically important. Developing a relationship with the client is tremendously important. What we know from work on common factors is that the specific technique you use is not where the majority of the change comes from. It's from your relationship. So although we did focus on technique today, we are going to focus on so much more than that in the therapy itself. We're going to build that relationship and provide the support. And in particular, we're going to support them with resources. On our website, which I already showed you, you'll find a bunch of our free resources. Of course, you'll find our books and other materials that we have there. Another aspect of our resources is the upcoming office hours that we've got. So we have, hold on, Nina's going to advance. There we go. Next week, we're going to talk specifically about families. May 15th, plan now. It's going to be Ask Us Anything. We'll leave an open hour for whatever questions. And on the 22nd, Nina will be doing a poll on social media with our followers, so you get a chance to tell us what you most want to know. Go to our website, stutteringtherapyresources.com, and join our mailing list. I promise we don't send out a lot of emails. We're just too busy, but we will send out things like the Zoom link for the next sessions, announcement about new material, and some new products that we've been working on that we think you're going to love because we are really excited about them. So here's some of our information. Nina?
Yes, and I just want to thank everyone for joining and staying a few extra minutes. If we didn't answer your question in the chat, please know that, oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, please email us at info@westutter. Okay, I just gave him the National Stuttering Association's website.
Oh, that's
Let me
good
try
stuff
again.
too.
Yeah, info@westutter.org, but don't email them with the questions you have for us. Info@stutteringtherapyresources.com, and we will try to get to your questions and send you an email. We're pretty good at that. Also, we want to let you know that someone asked about a coupon code for our materials. And yes, we're going to do a May is Better Speech and Hearing Month coupon. Of course, National Stuttering Awareness Week is coming up, and so we will have some discounts. So make sure to join our mailing list and make sure to follow us on our social media platforms so you will be able to see those codes as they come up.
Exactly. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. It's been great fun, and we'll hope to see you again next week.
See you soon.